What if I told you that in the year 1297, a single knight stood against 8,000 men and lived to tell about it? What if I told you that he won every single combat, killed 342 warriors with his own hands, and yet won absolutely nothing? What if I told you that this knight's story was deliberately erased from history because what happened on that battlefield was so disturbing, so unnatural, that chroniclers refused to record it? The knight's name was Sir Godwin de Mortimer, and his story begins not with glory, but with a curse that would make death itself recoil in horror. In the winter of 1296, Sir Godwin was no different from any other knight in service to King Edward I. He had lands, a wife named Isabel, and twin sons who had just learned to walk. He was respected, feared by his enemies, and loved by his family. But Godwin had one fatal flaw. He could not let go of what he believed was rightfully his. When his elder brother Edmund died without male heirs, Godwin expected to inherit the family castle of Mortimer. Instead, the lands went to Edmund's daughter, Godwin's own niece, who was barely 16 years old. The law was clear, but Godwin's rage was clearer. He challenged the inheritance, lost in court, and then made a decision that would damn his soul forever. On the night of the winter solstice, Godwin rode to Mortimer Castle and demanded entry. When his niece refused, he ordered his men to break down the gates. What happened next was recorded by a single surviving servant, a mute girl who could only draw what she witnessed. Her drawings, found centuries later in a monastery, show scenes so disturbing that the church ordered them burned. But copies survived, hidden away, and they tell a story that history tried to forget. Sir Godwin did not simply kill his niece. He imprisoned her in the castle's highest tower, and there he subjected her to tortures that had no name. For 7 nights, her screams echoed across the countryside. On the 8th night, silence fell. The servant's final drawing shows Godwin kneeling beside his niece's broken body, his hands raised to the sky, his mouth open in what appears to be not a cry of anguish, but a dark prayer. What Godwin had done was not just murder, it was a ritual, an offering to something that should never be awakened. And something answered that. The curse that fell upon Godwin was not the kind found in fairy tales. He did not turn into a beast or lose his mind. Instead, he gained something far worse, the inability to die in battle, coupled with an insatiable hunger for combat that would never be satisfied. Every wound would heal, every broken bone would mend, every drop of spilled blood would regenerate. He would fight, and fight, and fight, until the end of time, and never find peace. Word of Godwin's crime spread quickly, but so did stories of his impossible prowess in combat. Travelers spoke of seeing him on roads throughout England, challenging every warrior he met to single combat. He never lost. Knights, men-at-arms, even legendary fighters fell before his sword. But victory brought him no joy, no satisfaction. Each win only made the hunger worse. King Edward, hearing these reports, declared Godwin an outlaw. A bounty was placed on his head, 1,000 pounds of silver for the man who could kill the knight who would not die. But as the months passed, the bounty went unclaimed. Every hunter who sought Godwin either returned empty-handed or never returned at all. It was in the summer of 1297 that fate finally caught up with Sir Godwin de Mortimer. He had taken shelter in a ruined abbey when scouts brought news that an army was approaching. Not an English army, but something far more dangerous. 8,000 Scottish warriors, led by William Wallace himself, were marching south toward the border. They had been raiding English settlements for months, and their reputation for brutality was well known. Any sane man would have fled. Any normal knight would have ridden to warn the nearest English garrison. But Godwin was neither sane nor normal anymore. The curse had changed him, twisted his mind until only one thought remained: find worthy opponents and fight until something, anything, could grant him the death he craved. As dawn broke on July 23, 1297, Sir Godwin de Mortimer rode out to meet the Scottish army alone. The battle that followed defied every law of warfare and nature. Contemporary sources, what few exist, describe it as less a fight than a harvest. Godwin moved through the Scottish ranks like death himself, his sword cutting down warrior after warrior with mechanical precision. He felt no fatigue, showed no mercy, and displayed no emotion beyond a terrible, empty hunger. The Scots were no cowards. They had faced English knights before and won, but this was different. This was a man who could not be killed, fighting against men who could only die. Spears shattered against his armor, swords broke upon his shield, and arrows passed through him like he was made of mist. Yet for every wound that should have killed him, Godwin only grew stronger, as if death itself was feeding his unnatural vitality. By midday, 342 Scottish warriors lay dead at Godwin's feet. The survivors had seen enough. These were hardened fighters who had faced overwhelming odds before, but what they witnessed that day broke something fundamental in their understanding of the world. They fled, abandoning their weapons, their wounded, even their horses, in their desperation to escape the knight who could not die. But here is where the story takes its darkest turn. As the last Scottish warrior disappeared over the horizon, Sir Godwin de Mortimer finally understood the true nature of his curse. He had not been granted the power to never lose in battle. He had been doomed to never win anything that mattered. Curse had taken everything from him: his family, his honor, his mortality, even his capacity for satisfaction. He could kill 1,000 men, 10,000, but he would never feel victorious. He could defeat entire armies, but he would always remain exactly what he was: a broken, damned soul, trapped in an endless cycle of meaningless violence. Standing alone on that blood-soaked battlefield, surrounded by the bodies of men who had died for something they believed in, Godwin realized that his punishment was not death in battle, but the complete inability to find meaning in anything he had done or would ever do. The servant's drawings, remember, showed one final image, not of Godwin's crime, but of its aftermath. It depicts the knight, still alive, still cursed, walking away from the battlefield as the sun sets. But if you look closely at this final drawing, you can see something that the church tried to erase: Godwin's shadow. It does not match his body. His shadow shows not a man, but something with too many arms, too many weapons, and a mouth that stretches impossibly wide, as if it contains not teeth, but an endless void. History records that William Wallace and his army were defeated at the Battle of Stirling Bridge several months later. But Scottish chroniclers tell a different story. They say Wallace's men were never the same after their encounter with the knight who could not die. They had seen something that challenged their understanding of life, death, and the nature of divine justice. Many refused to fight again. Others went mad, speaking constantly of a demon in the shape of a man who harvested souls like wheat. As for Sir Godwin de Mortimer, official records claim he died in battle sometime in 1290. His body was supposedly found and buried in consecrated ground. But unmarked graves have a way of becoming empty, and local folklore tells a different story. For more than 700 years, there have been reports throughout Britain of a lone knight appearing on battlefields, in tournaments, even in back-alley fights. Always the same description: a man in archaic armor, wielding a sword that never dulls, challenging anyone brave enough to face him. He never speaks, never removes his helmet, and never ever loses. But those who survive encounters with him report the same disturbing detail: beneath that helmet, where a face should be, there is only darkness. Not shadow, but an absolute void, as if the curse had finally consumed everything human about Sir Godwin de Mortimer, leaving behind only the hunger for combat and the terrible knowledge that no victory will ever be enough. The last confirmed sighting was in 1916, during the Battle of the Somme. Several British soldiers reported seeing a medieval knight moving through no man's land. Unaffected by machine gun fire and poison gas, he was said to be walking toward the German trenches, sword in hand, still searching for an opponent who might finally be able to grant him the one thing he could never win for himself: peace. Some say he's still out there, wandering battlefields that exist in the spaces between life and death. Others claim the curse finally broke, that 7 centuries of meaningless victory finally taught him the lesson he needed to learn. But the servant's drawings tell a different story. The final image, the one the church tried hardest to destroy, shows not Sir Godwin de Mortimer walking into the sunset, but something far more disturbing. It shows his shadow, detached from his body, still standing on that battlefield from 1290. The shadow has grown larger, darker, and more complex. It now contains not just the silhouette of one cursed knight, but the shadows of every warrior he ever defeated, every soul he ever claimed, trapped forever in the service of a man who learned, too late, that some victories are indistinguishable from defeat. When dawn came, the battlefield was empty, only his blood remained. But blood has memory, and some stains never wash away. They seep into the earth, into the stones, into the very fabric of reality itself, waiting for the next person who believes that victory at any cost is worth pursuing. The question that remains is not whether Sir Godwin de Mortimer ever found peace. The question is whether he ever truly wanted it. Because sometimes, the greatest curse is not being denied what you think you want, but being given exactly what you asked for, forever and ever, without end. And somewhere, in the space between legend and nightmare, a knight in tarnished armor continues his eternal hunt for an opponent worthy enough to finally let him lose.